Thanks, everyone. We're going to get right into the big topic of this year's election, and of course, the main topic that Americans care about, which is affordability and what exactly our lawmakers and other policymakers can do about it. So, I want to start with Congressman Khazar as the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. You all recently released a new affordability agenda that deals with the costs of groceries, housing, childcare, healthcare. I'm sure there's something I'm leaving out there. However, pardon? Gas. All sorts of goodies. However, even if Democrats sweep the House this midterms and maybe even take the Senate, you will still have to contend with a Republican in the White House, President Donald Trump, who can veto legislation. So my question for you is, what on the agenda do you think you can actually get signed into law in the next year? Is this mostly a messaging bill, or excuse me, a messaging agenda about what you would like to get done? Or are there concrete things that you think you could peel off either Republican support in the legislature and or the support of a president so that people's lives and access to an affordable lifestyle can actually change next year?
Thank you for the question. Good morning, everyone. So the Progressive Caucus put out a list of 10 proposals to lower the cost of everything from housing to childcare, gas, utilities, to stop price gouging, to increase your wages and benefits. And when we went out and tested the support for the Progressive Caucus's ideas, we found not only overwhelming support amongst Democrats and independents and voters in swing districts, but amongst Republicans. We're actually not a single one of the ideas that we can talk about here in a moment polled at less than 2/3 support amongst Republican voters. And so when I believe, just like Leader Jeffries believes, that we will retake the House through the work that we do over the next few months. And then there will be a lot of accountability work that Democrats rightly need to do against the Trump administration. But if all we do is accountability, but don't also do affordability work, show voters not only that we're against Trump, voters already know that, but also show people what we're for, regain people's trust as the party of working class people, then I think we'll have failed. And so I think that we should push forward bold ideas and new ideas that will interest voters, like Ro Khanna's windfall profits tax on the gas companies that are making a killing right now. Instead of just providing people a small amount of relief, we should tax the enormous profits that the oil companies are making by jacking up prices right now, send a rebate check back to Americans, and at $100 a barrel of oil, this proposal would send everybody about a $400 rebate. We should pass that out of the House. If we retake the Senate, push to get that out of the Senate, and then either win Donald Trump's signature because it's supported just as heavily by Republican voters as Democratic voters, or he can veto it. And if he does, then it shows voters that Democrats were fighting to lower their costs and that Donald Trump stopped it. And then those contenders running for president in the next election cycle have a foundation of ideas to say Donald Trump blocked that bill that would have lowered your utility costs by $500 a year. Donald Trump blocked that bill that would have lowered your grocery prices, and I would have signed it. And I think that that is the kind of aggressive posture that Democrats need to take to not only be an anti-Trump party, but a pro-working class party.
And to clarify, do you think that the windfall profits tax piece of this would be the one that would be most likely to have real benefit? I mean, well, most likely.
I don't get paid enough to be a good Donald Trump predictor.
Fair.
But I think that we should not lower our ambitions as a House majority as whatever we can get the Donald Trump world to think we can do. I think that we actually have to make sure that voters understand that we really care about their pocketbooks. I hear about it all the time when I've done over half a dozen town halls in Republican-held districts. And I ask people that voted for Vice President Harris to lower their hands, not ask me a question for a second, and for people that voted for Trump or chose not to vote to ask me a question. And I hear time and time and time again that maybe they voted for Trump, but they're already sick of him, but they want to know what Democrats will do so that people don't have to check their bank account before they go to the grocery store. People say, I pull 7/12s. That means working over 70 hours a week, but still can't afford my childcare. We should pass the bill that was Mikey Sherrill's bill, now is AOC's bill, that would guarantee $10 a day childcare to virtually every single family and tax the ultra rich to do it. We should pass my bill that would update our overtime laws for the first time in 90 years to have overtime pay double time so that people can make a little bit more money and maybe work a little bit fewer hours so they can actually spend time with their kids. And when we talk about ideas like that, I think we can build the kind of big tent coalition necessary to not just win a midterm on anti-Trump sentiment, but actually bring the Democratic Party back in line with the vast majority of our natural base.
Congressman Frost, the largest monthly expense for most households is housing, which has become a huge burden, not just on the blue coasts, the liberal coasts, but basically nationwide at this point. And there's lots of evidence that since 2006, more or less, we have underbuilt housing across this country, that as younger people have moved out of their parents' homes and formed their own families, there's just not enough housing for them to buy. What can we do? And in fact, as I'm sure you know, a lot of members of Gen Z think that home ownership is out of their reach forever. So what can we do to ensure that there is enough housing for everyone?
This is really important. I think to what Greg was saying, we would have failed if we do not, as a Democratic majority, move forward a comprehensive housing package that will address this from A to Z. And part of the problem with this whole discussion in housing is everybody has one idea and they think that idea is the thing that's going to solve the problem. This is just not true. This is a difficult problem for the federal government to tackle, but I think we can tackle it, and it's going to take everything. We have to ensure that we build more housing, of course. There's a lot of things that we can do as a government to incentivize cities and towns and municipalities to get rid of exclusionary zoning, get rid of parking minimums, these different things that we need to do to make sure that we have more inventory. But that alone is not enough. We also have to ensure that we pass good consumer protection laws to protect tenants, which is something that's really near and dear to me. I live in Florida, which has some of the worst tenant protections in the nation. While I was running for Congress, when the rent hike moratorium was lifted during COVID, I got priced out of my apartment. I was homeless for 2 months. I literally spent all my money in my bank account on an Airbnb for a month, and I was like, Future Max will figure it out. A month passed, Future Max did not figure it out. And then I was homeless for a while during my campaign. Then I said, well, at least if I win my race for Congress, I will never have to deal with this again. I get elected to Congress, and as a congressman-elect, I get denied to every apartment complex I applied to here in D.C. because my credit score was poor, because during my campaign, I ran up a ton of debt. And so, and there was nothing to help protect me or help me get into housing. In fact, when I moved to D.C., I took out a loan to be able to pay the first, last, and deposit to get a place here. And even with the money in my bank, even though my dad would say if you had to take a loan out, you'd have the money. But even with the money in my bank, I couldn't get a place to live. I was told no. I was told no to having the high honor of paying the high rent. And so I just think there's a lot we need to do. And then home ownership is such an important part of this, especially for young people, but really everybody. I've been doing a lot of town halls across Florida and in my district on housing specifically, which is the number one issue I hear about when I go knock doors anywhere in my state. And we have a homeowners insurance crisis in the state of Florida and really across the country that is pricing out seniors in homes that they've lived in their entire lives pretty much, but they're on a fixed income and they're having to put their home up for sale. And young people who are saying, not only is it a figment or something they feel like it can never happen, it's just like out of the realm of possibility. And this leads to a bigger problem. Usually, the largest asset a working person will own is what? Their house. We have an ownership crisis in this country that deeply impacts working people and especially young people. Not to put my tinfoil hat on, but it's everything. It's housing, and we're moving. If current trends continue, most people, the vast majority of people will not own their home. They'll rent forever, and the rents can continue to go up or down. we don't own the music we listen to anymore. We don't own the movies we watch anymore. If trends continue, most people won't own the car that they drive. And actually, if trends continue, most people won't own the phone that they have in their pocket. You won't own a damn thing. And I think the home ownership crisis is indicative of something much bigger going on, where just a few people will have the keys to everything in our country, which means when somebody needs to be bailed out, who gets bailed out? The people who own everything. And that is an existential problem for working people in the rest of this country. It's not that we don't want people to do well, it's we want everybody to do well. But it's kind of hard to do that in this country when you can't even own the roof over your head. I think there's a lot we can do as a nation. Something a lot of people aren't talking about is manufactured housing. I just released the bill on this, which right now in Florida, about a fourth of the manufactured housing communities have been purchased by private equity. And in case you don't know the way it works, you essentially own the house you live in, the manufactured home, but you don't own the land that the home is on. And what's going on is these communities are being bought, usually from mom and pop companies across the country, and having their rents jacked up, their lot rents jacked up by a lot. In fact, there's a community in my district who saw it go up by double. And now they're putting the taxes of the land on the renters as well. And manufactured housing for a lot of seniors and a lot of veterans is the last safe haven for home ownership, affordable home ownership in the country. And so I put forth a bill that essentially will help us make it so that way folks who live in these communities can own the land that their house is on top of as well. But it's like things like this that piece together, I think, can create a comprehensive housing bill to help us with this crisis. But the era of the federal government saying that's a state and local issue is over. There's a lot that we can do to help solve the housing crisis.
I'm wondering actually if you could talk a little bit more about creating incentives for states and localities to allow more building, in part because of something that you just said, that for many Americans, their single most valuable asset is in their home. So that means when housing prices fall or rents fall, which is necessary for people who are trying to get into a home, that also means that somebody's nest egg gets less valuable, right? That's part of the reason why it is so difficult to build in a lot of communities in America, because people don't necessarily want their home value to decrease because that's their retirement. And so that leads to a lot of friction against building new homes, because the supply of new homes, again, will benefit people who are trying to get into housing, but may hurt the people who already own their homes. So how do you change that dynamic so that you don't have sort of that almost natural NIMBYist impulse for people to not want more housing, lest it devalue what is their retirement plan?
I've had this conversation a lot in my roundtables when we talk about housing, and people come from different places if they would consider themselves a NIMBY, right? I got to tell you, for a lot of the more working families I speak to who have been able to get into home ownership, even though they've been able to get into it, most of them, not most of them, but a lot of them are what you would consider house poor, right? Where they have gotten to a situation where mortgage, insurance, taxes, everything that you have to pay. Most of them are paying PMI because they couldn't afford the deposit on their home. Are in a place where they just don't have that kind of money. So they do want, of course, their home value to go up. Anyone wants that. But I think people see what's going on in their communities, and they understand the fact that the home prices are so high, and most of them the sticker shock is so recent for them. They just purchased their home maybe a year ago, or maybe they purchased it 10 years ago, and they too realize that the price of their home was way too high. And I think there's a lot of things that we can do to help with that. But this notion that we have to pit homeowners against tenants or homeowners against potential homeowners, I think is false. And I don't see it in my community. And I also don't see it when I travel the country and talk with people about housing prices, because I hear many of the same complaints from people regardless of what situation they're in.
Congressman Underwood, you've worked throughout your career on healthcare, including in the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. Historically, Democrats, I think, have focused their firepower when it comes to healthcare on expanding insurance, on making sure more people are covered. There are obviously a lot of frustrations now about the cost of healthcare, even among those who are insured, who have insurance plans. What can be done to make healthcare affordable? to make healthcare more affordable for those who have coverage, as the promise of the Affordable Care Act indicated?
Well, I think that this is by far one of the most salient issues in this moment because everyone needs healthcare. You need to be able to see a provider, fill a prescription, get a procedure when you need one, right? And so this is something that's top of mind for so many folks. And yet you have Donald Trump and the Republicans in charge passing their big ugly bill, taking $1 trillion out of Medicaid. So we have about 6 months until we reach this point where the American people are really going to be feeling that acutely of folks being kicked off of their coverage. So it's not about, at that level, affordable. That's, do you have healthcare or not? Yes or no? We have a real crisis right now because they refuse to extend the ACA tax credits, the extremely popular ACA tax credits that was based on my bill, the Healthcare Affordability Act, which drove down the uninsured rate to the lowest levels in U.S. history. But Donald Trump told the Republicans, don't waste time on extending them. And now 20% of enrollees have been kicked off their plans because they can't afford to see their premium double, triple, quadruple, right? So some of the stuff is just real basic, like extend the ACA tax credits, like an overwhelming majority of the House of Representatives voted to do in January of this year after we stood together and forced a discharge petition and a floor vote on the House, right? We got 17 Republicans to stand with us, but the Senate refused to take it up, right? This solution is right there for us in our grasp. Obviously, making sure that we can take action quickly in a Democratic majority to block these Medicaid cuts from going into effect, the $500 billion that's slated to come out of Medicare. But then you have all kind of stuff that we need to do on prescription drugs, improving access to primary care visits, improving access for people who just need to be able to use the healthcare that they have. We know that there are tremendous barriers to people being able to manage their chronic illnesses, to being able to actually improve their healthcare status. And then we have this whole issue of health equity, where we have these entrenched disparities that we see among communities of color, rural communities, low-income communities, et cetera, right? And so all of that will require our intention and our investment. I think at the end of the day, if we only focus on cost, then we are not always improving our healthcare system. If we only focus on cost, we are not always improving folks' health status. And I think that when we have a Robert Kennedy as the Secretary of Health and Human Services, serving as the biggest source of misinformation and the largest threat to public health in our country, we have to have a wide-angle lens when it comes to tackling the multifaceted healthcare issues that we face. Just right now, today, we got an Ebola outbreak with an American who's been confirmed, and nothing out of HHS. Right now, today, you got the hantavirus, and folks freaking out, and nothing. We can't get access to reliable data, right? Like, I guess my point is this. Yes, we have to lower costs. To win this election, we have to have a plan. I think we have a plan. People understand it. It's not that complicated. We're the party that believes you deserve health care. They're the party that believes, actually, no. Nope. Sorry. It's that simple, right? It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. But I think in order to actually make improvements, we have to tackle the wide range of issues.
Well, can you give a little bit of color to that? So what are some examples of things that Democrats should be focusing on, should be pitching to voters as we head into the midterms? I take your point about expanding or re-upping those enhanced premium tax credits and rolling back some of the Medicaid cuts. Beyond those two things, which are about undoing Trump damage, are there other specific points that you think are pretty salient to voters?
Sure.
That could address costs, let's say.
Okay. Well, you need to have a place to go. And so let's make sure that our rural hospitals are in good shape. I represent a suburban and rural community outside of Chicago, where already in the last year, since the Big Ugly Bill has been into effect, we've seen unit closures, PEDS closures, ICUs closures, and those facilities need a cash infusion. They need some help staying open. I have a bill prioritizing our Rural Hospitals Act. Easy. We could get that moving. In the Farm Bill, guys, it doesn't even, I mean, hello. Let's be smart in how we move our bills. I think that we have the Department of Education is trying to roll back access to student loans for our healthcare workers, right? So we're going to have fewer providers. If you don't have access to, let's say, a nurse practitioner in your community, and there is no physician, what are you supposed to do? We need to expand our healthcare workforce so that people can actually go in. That's how we drive down costs. We need more workers in every community and every zip code. We are trying to overturn this really devastating regulation coming from the Department of Education. On prescription drugs, I mean, everything from inhalers to insulin to, anything to manage chronic illness. I have a bill, the Chronic Condition Copay Elimination Act. Okay, like there's solutions. It doesn't have to explode the deficit or anything like that. We just have to care to solve the problem. But I think that in terms of messaging for the election, we keep it real tight and real simple. Fix our broken healthcare system. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. It really doesn't. And I would really encourage us to really focus on winning so that people can get the healthcare that they deserve.
Congressman Kazar, Democrats have, to this date, made a relatively compelling case that part of the affordability crisis falls at the feet of Donald Trump's economic agenda, particularly his tariffs. And if you look at estimates from places like the Yale Budget Lab, they suggest that the tariffs in the past year raised the costs for the typical American household by at least $700, something in that wheelhouse. I noticed that in your plan for the progressive affordability agenda, there was nothing about tariffs. So my question to you is, given that Democrats have isolated one of the core problems as being about this trade policy, if Democrats retake the House and the Senate, do you think Trump's tariff should be on the chopping block?
Yes. I mean, I think that we absolutely will and should undo the reckless tariff policy from Trump. But if we get pushed to say all we're going to do is undo his Medicaid cuts, all we do is undo his tariffs, then I think we are going to wind up in a real problem, because there are forces within the party arguing essentially Democrats stay boring, that what we want is just for everybody to notice how bad Trump is, for us to not be too noticed, and then things will go our way. That may turn out to work in a midterm election, but if we follow the Constitution, Trump won't be on the ballot again. And if we don't regain the trust of working people, and if people don't know what we're for, then I'm worried that Josh Hawley or J.D. Vance or Tucker Carlson or whoever could beat us next. And that's just not acceptable, because it's already been way too hard on the country to deal with a year and a half of this. Imagine 12 years of this kind of a White House. So if we want to regain people's trust, they have to know that, yes, we're going to repeal the horrible Trump policies. We're going to hold them accountable for their criminal and corrupt actions, but also that we're willing to take on villains in the AI industry that are price gouging you. We have a bill in the new affordability agenda to ban surveillance pricing where, for example, the other day, JetBlue basically admitted on the internet to someone that they were having to buy a plane ticket to get to a funeral. JetBlue had data on the person, and they suddenly had a ticket price nearly $300 higher. We should just ban that and take on those.
Sorry to interrupt. JetBlue has actually since said that they do not use any personal data.
Then they should support the bill if they think that nobody should be allowed to do that. Of course they said that. Instacart got caught doing the exact same thing. We should be willing to take on the utility companies that Democrats and Republicans alike hate, because our utility costs for these for-profit utilities, some people's bills have gone up 50% just in the last few years. Donald Trump became president villainizing immigrants, saying that the bad guys were LGBT youth. And I think Democrats need to be willing to take on villains ourselves, whether it's in big oil or in big pharma or these big utility companies, so that people notice us, so that people know who we are. And in my view, those ideas actually unite the party. Whether you are moderate or progressive, these ideas are very, very popular across the country. They divide the lobbyists. They might get us uninvited from some dinners, but I would rather get uninvited from some dinners and win the damn election.
Just before we move on from tariffs for a second, the Constitution, Article 1, says that Congress has power over international commerce and sets and lays taxes. Do you think, to your point about future presidents may try to abuse their power in similar ways, that should Democrats retake the Senate and the House, they should try to curb the limits on all presidents' ability to set tariff policy without the consent of Congress? Because over the years, Congress has essentially delegated away a lot of its constitutional authority here.
Yeah, we definitely need structural reform to make our policies stick and to make sure that voters' voices are heard. And so, of course, we should rein in the justices, the Supreme Court, the folks that continue to let Trump have this runaway power, because I don't think that we will have succeeded in the next trifecta if we get there. If we pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, if we pass these bills to lower your housing costs or increase health care, and the Supreme Court just tells us no. So I think that in this moment where a right-wing Supreme Court is so eroding voters' rights, so eroding the Constitution, we have to be willing to say that we need to take on the Supreme Court, make sure that voters' concerns and voices are heard so that we actually restore abortion rights, so that we actually restore civil rights, and so that we actually can show people we made their lives cheaper and less expensive. That's what FDR had to try to do, or at least threaten to do. And what I hear from folks all the time is that they would vote for the Democratic Party of FDR and LBJ, of the New Deal and the Fair Labor Standards Act and building unions across the country and defeating fascism around the world, and the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act and the creation of Medicare and Medicaid and Head Start. That's the kind of Democratic Party we need to be, and that means being willing to take on an out-of-control executive as well as the Supreme Court.
Well, part of the reason I asked specifically about the executive rather than the Supreme Court is that Donald Trump also abused his tariff authority in his first term. Democrats were very critical of those tariffs then. When his successor, President Biden, came into office, he kept almost all of those tariffs in place. Maybe swapped some of them out for different kinds of trade restrictions.
Yeah, look, I believe that we need to restore the Constitution, and that's part of why I think justices need to actually hold the executive to the law. We've seen a huge double standard here by the Supreme Court. That's the reason I went there. I would caution us, of course, we should take on Donald Trump in the crazy way he's used the tariffs. You read what he says on this any given day, it's nuts. But I also don't want us to, as progressives, as liberals, to be so we have, of course, been so shocked by how horrible Trump has abused his authority. And for our only response to then be, we need an executive who can do very little. Because what we actually also need is for the next Democratic president to be able to act aggressively to rebuild everything that Doge tore down, to be able to implement policy quickly. It's almost unthinkable today that when LBJ signed Medicare into law, he started enrolling millions of seniors 1 year later, the next July. We need an executive that when we pass transformative policy that takes on corporate interests and makes working class people believe in our collective power again, that we have an executive that can actually execute that quickly and doesn't have to jump through 10 million hoops.
Congressman Frost, your colleague just now, or a few minutes ago, mentioned AI and a lot of the anxiety around AI. As I'm sure our audience knows, it's graduation season. People are graduating from high school, graduating from college. There is a lot of angst out there about the job market. And if you look at the unemployment rate for young workers, whether college graduate or not, it is ticking up, it is rising. And some of that angst has to do with the advent of this new technology, that it may displace a lot of entry-level type jobs. To what extent do you think AI-driven job displacement is similar or different from other kinds of mass job displacement we've seen in the past. I'm thinking things like trade, other kinds of automation. And how does that imply policymakers should respond to it, if it is similar or if it is different? Is it the same set of tools, essentially, that we've used before for these other kinds of seismic shifts, or is it something different?
I mean, there's similarities and differences. I mean, one of the big differences is the fact that the difference between this and automation is that this is going to be cheaper to implement and happen more quickly than it did with automation. So there's less time for us as a government to be able to respond to helping our constituents, working people. And taking a step back, I think part of the issue that we have in Congress is, number one, most people don't know anything about tech. Okay. And that creates a big issue because we have to legislate common sense guardrails now. Because if we don't do that, there will be an emergency that then pushes us to have to advocate for something more radical, essentially, that will have that much more opposition. And this whole thing happened with social media. I always talk to people about social media. Decades ago, Congress buries its head in the sand. In fact, in many cases, makes the situation worse for the average person. Now we're having an emergency with social media, keeping our children safe online, our data being used against us, this and that. And like the big idea people come up with is like, let's ban TikTok. Like that's going to solve the problem. And it didn't. And in fact, in many cases, that whole thing made it worse. I'm really worried that when it comes down to technology, Congress does the same thing over and over again. And it's really important. And I like that I see more people running on this, because we need folks who are willing to step into it, experts themselves, because what ends up happening is that industry writes the bill. We want common sense guardrails. And this is what I hear from people across the country when I travel. You see the college graduations. My University of Central Florida, UCF, where my district is, had one of those viral videos of someone saying AI is the next industrial revolution, and every student in the audience booed. It's because, and it's coming from a real place, guys, right now, it's always been hard to be a young person, yes. Right now, it is uniquely difficult, and the numbers prove this to us. For college graduates, it is the worst time ever in this country's history. After you've done everything you were told to do, you got all the debt you were told to accrue, you were told that if you accrue this debt, you'll be able to get a good paying job and pay it off and you'll be fine. It is the worst time to find work for college graduates in the history of our country. It's right now. And so they see this, they see the rise of AI, they see everything. And people are rightfully nervous and concerned that they won't be able to be an adult that's able to feed themselves and have a roof over their head. And so I think it's important that Congress does something, and I am concerned about it. Of course, we know that, like every technology, there are things where we're going to have societal benefits from it, and there's things that are not going to be a benefit to our society. I guess where I'm coming from is the things that a lot of these companies already say they believe in, let's hold them to it, and making sure we pass common sense guardrails to protect workers and protect working class people as we go into this. We know technology far outpaces government and Congress. And this is another problem. We have to modernize government because we can't keep up ourselves. We don't have the in-house capabilities to be able to keep up with the private sector. And that's part of the reason why we're always far behind. So let's pass common sense guardrails to hold everyone to what they say they believe anyway. And I think that's really important in keeping our constituents in mind.
I do want to push back on one thing. It's not the worst time in history to have been a college graduate. I mean, young college graduates, I think their unemployment rate is like 5.6% or something like that. It was definitely higher during the financial crisis.
But you have to take in the totality of circumstances going on in our country right now. Not just finding employment, but the wages. Have they kept up with inflation, housing, the cost of food, healthcare, all the things we're talking about right now. So yeah, marginally the numbers might be up or down on employment, but the quality of the job, how much it pays you, and what that pay is able to get you is very difficult for young people right now. And I see it not just in the numbers. All my friends, people my age, my girlfriend, my best friends, the people in my life who are struggling with this right now.
But so you said common sense reforms. I think everybody agrees common sense is a good thing. I don't think anybody is like against common sense. Well,
you'd be surprised. There's a lot of people against common sense.
There's a lot of money in not following common sense.
But again, to my question, what does that mean in terms of protections for workers, or how should policymakers be thinking about this? Is it just about, again, the same kinds of tools we've had in the past, unemployment insurance, other kinds of safety net programs? Is there something specific?
Yeah, and I wonder, L2, in the affordability, did we have anything on AI in that?
We had an anti-price gouging provision, but frankly, I think that if you listen to the CEOs of these AI companies, they're talking about 20% unemployment. Sure, it would be nice if it turns out not that way, but when you hear Elon Musk saying humans won't be needed for most work, when you hear what Bill Gates has to say about this, I think we should be planning aggressively that this isn't just the invention of the steam engine. You're talking about taking away a foundational part of what makes a society, which is people having the dignity of work. So I think we aggressively should be thinking about taxing AI as a method of making sure we have sort of a works progress administration of the future. We should be making sure the government ensures that we are not going up into depression levels of unemployment. I think we need an expansion of collective bargaining so that workers have the power to negotiate as AI is being integrated into our society, because the idea of just a big, expansive social safety net program, but 20% of people aren't working, I think that is, to me, that sounds dystopic and something the Democratic Party should be strongly against.
And something else I think is important, too, on the AI conversation. I recently went to Los Angeles to speak with a bunch of songwriters about this. There's a lot of anxiety in the creative economy. And in many ways, I think actually starting the conversation where it's the hardest and talking about how the rise of this is hurting creatives. What does it mean to create something? What does it mean to be compensated for something? How can we even how do we use the technology to figure out if the song you wrote was used in an AI model to write this other song, this and that? I think solving those questions are actually important, even though it might not feel pertinent to most of society. These are the hardest questions to answer, in my opinion, as it relates to AI and emerging technology. When you're able to answer those hard questions, it makes it easier to work backwards from that, if that makes sense.
I'm going to take a question or two from the audience. I have more of my own, but the first question is for everyone. What will you do to accelerate the pace of implementation of solutions, such as things as getting more housing built, solving for universal health care, removal of Citizens United, a more progressive tax system? Basically, how will you move fast to solve problems? Congresswoman Underwood, let's start with you.
Well, as Democrats, we like to be right, okay? We like to debate each other all day. We have symposiums, we have dinners, we write binders full of policy white papers to assert our opinion on why our idea is the best. We got to get rid of that and work with the urgency that we have seen on display from Donald Trump and the Republicans in charge. We have to get rid of the ego and be willing to just get it done and try to fix it later. Okay? I'm not saying we have to hurt people, but I'm saying, like, we cannot spend all of our time and screw around with our majority fighting with each other. And when we have an idea that can get a majority vote, we need to put it on the floor and move forward. That's number one. Number two, we got to get rid of the filibuster. I don't want to hear it, but, no, it's got to go. If we are serious about saving this country, our democracy, and advancing an affordability agenda, that filibuster is standing squarely in our path, and it's got to go. And I just think, in my opinion, we are not functioning in normal times. This is a survival moment. In survival moments, you make different decisions than you would ordinarily make. And I think we have to be clear-eyed about all that is necessary to accomplish and the limited window of time that we will have to get these things done.
To add on this, and this is something I've been thinking a lot about as well, a big problem, too, is the way that Congress writes the legislation. And you'd be, I mean, just look at our immigration system, right? I mean, it is just piecemeal ideas thrown at something after decade after decade after decade, and not a group of people sitting down and figuring out how do we make a system that works? How do we create something that works? And my one concern with moving through big packages is that it ends up being piecemeal ideas from different members of Congress who I've had this bill and I've had this idea for a long time, and I want to make sure it's in the package that you're moving forward, but it doesn't necessarily fit into a bigger picture. And so to what Lauren said, that requires us to put our egos aside for a minute and figure out how are we going to pass legislation that, of course, accomplishes what we want to accomplish, make sure that the executive has what they need to make the implementation happen, but also possibly punish agencies that don't move as quickly as we want them to move by moving responsibility to other agencies and different things like that. And I think when we put on the hat of not just what do we want the goal to be, but how quickly do we want it, what do we want the timeline to be as well, that's how Congress is going to be able to write real legislation that doesn't just talk about what we want to have happen, but how fast we want it to happen, and attaching real strings to that, so that way we have real implementation and people feel it. Because if people feel the thing we're passing 4 to 8 years later, another president comes in and pulls a rug from underneath the bill, it didn't happen. Right? It didn't happen. And we need people to feel that government can work for them while we're in power.
Sounds like you kind of want a Democratic version of Doge, if I'm listening, but sure.
No, but that's the thing. Doge didn't do anything. Like, that's the thing with with Republicans and Donald Trump right now. It's the illusion of doing a lot, and of course they're doing horrible things. Number one, their agenda is easier to achieve because it's just destroying things, and we want to build things. But number two, like, Doge just really didn't do anything. It was a lot of showmanship. And so, sort of, we want to actually do things and, like, actually have people feel it in their lives.
All right. Congressman Kazar, last word to you.
I was a labor organizer in the construction industry before running for office, and I think that we need to be able to follow the construction site test, which is our ideas. Can we go talk to somebody on a construction site and it makes sense to them and it would help them and they understand it quickly? Our prior childcare proposals are like, we're going to send block grants to the state and you can apply for a voucher if you hit a certain income level. People are like, screw this. You've already lost them. We just need to implement a childcare program that makes it so you never pay more than 7% of your income. It's going to be for every single working American. Vast majority of people pay $10 a day. Somebody say, sign me up for that. Let's raise the minimum wage. Let's guarantee everybody 2 weeks paid vacation. These are the basic things that we should just be able to tell somebody, this is for you. It's going to improve your life. And we aren't going to go into a 5-year rulemaking process so that some other president can take credit for what we did. We want folks to say, I voted for that Democrat and I saw my life get better after my vote. It's, I think, that simple.
Well, thanks so much for the question from our audience, and thank you to our excellent panel. Look forward to talking more with you about all of these great ideas.